So to begin with, immigration. And let's start with the Italians. What brought them to Britain, and particularly to Bedford?
The Italians came to Bedford specifically to work at the London Brick Company. This was where the story began, as it were, in the late 50s. Just after the war, there was mass unemployment, mainly in the south of Italy. It was a very desperate situation, whereas in this country, there was a lack of workers. They couldn't find people to do the jobs, some jobs more than others, obviously, and so it was decided at government level to recruit, I think it was approximately 2,000 Italians in the first place, from the southern regions, mainly from the Campania region of Italy, to come over here, live in hostels and work at the London Brick Company. And then, if that was successful, after 2 years' contract, then the families could come over and join the heads of family that had been here for that time.
Pennies.
This is the De Feo family, one of the original families which immigrated almost intact to work for the London Brick Company. Memories of the process of migration are still vivid.
When we left Naples, we were examined in and out our body to see if we got TB. That's the first thing they were looking at. If we had TB or any other illness, when we reached Folkestone, we were examined exactly the same when we left home. One thing I don't like personal to say, okay, they examine us just like rotten eggs.
You didn't enjoy that process at all?
I didn't enjoy it, I didn't protest it, because my mind aiming just to go out of the country and get something better, not for myself, but for my family.
Asian Voice caters for the largest ethnic minority in the area.
You're listening to Asian Voice on 3 channels.
How big an audience does the program have?
On average, I would imagine over the whole of the region, between 20 to 30,000.
So why are there so many Asians then living in this particular area?
Well, in Luton especially, because of Vauxhall, employment is here, as opposed to the north, where I'm from, where employment is very scarce. And also because to join their families, people who've been here for 20, 30 years have brought over their families. So it's a natural thing to do.
So would you say there is a distinct Asian community living in the Bedfordshire area?
Yes, there is. In the Luton area, 3 major communities reside. The Pakistani community, the Bangladeshi community, and the Indian community. And it's more or less similar throughout as well.
So are there things then that unite all these distinct communities into one Asian community?
It's very difficult to say that. The word Asian doesn't really mean an awful lot to me. Asian can also mean Chinese, Japanese, Korean. But in this respect, the Asian community, as I said, represents the Bangladeshi, Indian and Pakistani communities. Each and every community is distinct. We all have a different language, 7 or 8 different languages. But the one thing which does unite us is our colour. From afar, we're all the same.
Going by religion, the Muslims are the biggest group in this area. Luton's Pakistani mosque is one of the largest in Britain. And there's a separate Bangladeshi mosque too. In Bedford, there's a large Sikh community. The Gandhi family are Hindus and live in Luton. Mr. Gandhi is a retired dentist and a justice of the peace. Both he and his wife grew up in India, where the virtues of community life, self-reliance and inner strength were instilled from an early age and proved of value when they decided to come to England.
I came to England for further studies. My education, primary, secondary and university education was carried out in India. And then while I was working, I was aspiring for higher things. And to this end, I decided to come to England for further studies. In 1956, I was 23 then, and having got here, I started a course at Royal College of Surgeons. I was prepared, I was trained to face all hardships and difficulties. I would do any kind of work to sustain myself, and all this gave me tremendous strength.
So you found it easy then to get a job?
Getting a job was extremely difficult. Initially, my qualification was not recognized, so I had to work in post office delivering mail at Christmas time like most students do, and I enjoyed that thoroughly. And I worked in a clothing factory where they were making children's clothes for a while.
Mrs. Gandhi waited in India with their baby until after a few months she could join her husband. How did she feel when she arrived here?
One pleasure thing that I'm joining him. First thing that we will manage. I will help him because with a family, it give him also courage and he can finish his study and we can go back. That was the idea.
How did you feel you were received when you arrived?
It was all right for me. I didn't feel any different much.
We regarded England as heaven from all the stories that we had heard. But when we first landed at Heathrow and came to Russell Square, where my accommodation was arranged, I wasn't all that terribly impressed because it was grim-looking houses, maybe because of smog or fog, which I now realize, but didn't in those days. Then my wife came. We were living in one bedsit room, and we were getting by. We had some friends from India who had also come here for further studies, so we didn't get directly involved initially with the host community, so we didn't face many difficulties.
We've seen here the main reasons for immigration to Britain since the war. The first was for work. Britain's buoyant economy during the 1950s and the shortage of workers meant that firms actively recruited labour from overseas. The second main reason for coming was to join relatives who were already working here. Others came to study and decided not to go home as planned. Not all immigrants who came to work had a job waiting for them, and some had built up false expectations of what life would be like in England. This is Dolores Hines. She left Jamaica to find work when her father became ill. She lived in Bedford with relatives who'd been recruited by London Brick some years before. Dolores arrived full of hope.
I wanted to be a nurse after seeing Nurse Campbell. She used to live at my uncle's house. She encouraged me and she said, you would make an ideal nurse, so try.
Did you find that when you got here you were a nurse?
No, it was very hard. There was not much opportunities for us to be nurses then. I should have applied while I was back in Jamaica. I didn't do that.
So instead of being a nurse, what did you do when you got to Britain?
I worked there in a canteen, or a restaurant on the High Street in Bedford. For about 4 months.
And then?
Well, I was unemployed. It's very hard to find jobs. Nobody would really give you a job. Well, and I had another job at a place called Gamlingay. It was in a factory, and used to put some strips on some boxes. I don't know what they use those boxes for, but some little, about 4 strips on each box, the lid of the boxes. And I worked there for 6 months.
So you were never really getting the kinds of jobs that you'd wanted to get?
No, there was not much opportunities there then.
Why weren't there these opportunities?
Well, I don't know why they weren't, but where you apply for a job is sorry, no vacancies.
Was this the impression that you'd had before you left Jamaica?
No, that wasn't.
What impression did you have before you left Jamaica?
Well, we left, everything would be all right because we were British when we came here. So, a British citizen.
When the first black people came from the Caribbean, their experience was of an education system which had taught them, not only the education system, but the whole educational, social and political system had taught them that they were coming home. They were coming to Britain, their mother country. When they came, it was a great shock and a great disappointment. They found that they had, the stereotypes which they had built up of Britain in the Caribbean were untrue. The stereotypes which they had built up of people, of British people, were untrue. Because one of the biggest shocks for me when I came here was to see white people doing ordinary jobs. Because when I came from Jamaica back in 1965, that hadn't been a part of my experience in Jamaica.
Immigration brought other problems too. Families were often separated, if only temporarily. Many wives of the Italian brickworkers stayed behind in Italy at first and worried about their husbands.
This day very, very difficult to split up with the other because they gone with the other women and forget, some people forget wife. Really? In Italy, yeah. A lot of people forget. That's why my mum said, gone, I'll look after the children and no worry about the children and gone with your husband.
And why didn't you bring them with you?
Because you know, I have a place to wait. You can bring your children. You'll be lucky find the room for a husband and wife. But when you bring your children, it's very difficult to find the place. See, my husband say, you come in on air, just sacrifice for a couple of years, leave your children with your mum. And after 2 years, we buy the place to live and bring the children in our house.
After her initial disappointment, how did Dolores Hines get on? Well, she married a fellow Jamaica immigrant and had 5 children. But the marriage broke down, and she was left to bring up her children on her own. She never became a nurse. Nevertheless, she's glad she came to England.
I didn't get to do what I want to do, but I have the pleasure of seeing my children doing something they want to do, and very successful with it as well.
And that gives you a great deal of happiness.
Yes, I'm very happy.